So what are the responses to that? Cognitive refers to your brain, what your brain does to respond. Okay. Later we'll talk about actually behavior and what your body does, but cognitive refers to what your brain does when it has a sense of all of this accumulation of stressors going on. Well, the research shows that Black women suppress their emotions. Okay, so emotional suppression is one of the number one responses. They just suppress it. And suppress means to push it down. Suppress means to sweep it under the rug. Suppress means to not address it. Okay, they're not addressing it, they are suppressing it. Okay, and part of suppression is to laugh when you should cry, or to have your emotions be completely out of whack to where you are just keeping it all inside, but yet you let it burst out in other ways. Okay? So, suppression is a problem. It is not a good thing to do to suppress your emotions, because that could also be playing in on how we as Black women deal with our problems and how negative that can be, to suppress it and push it down and squash it. Because anytime you press or push something down and suppress it and squash it, it's going to have to, like air, move somewhere and go somewhere else. Okay, so keep that in mind. Another response that the brain can have is one that looks a lot like PTSD, okay, or post traumatic stress disorder. Post traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, is a problem that a lot of people see after they've had a shocking event happen to them. Something sudden and something that was just shocking to the system. Okay, like the events that happened on September 11th, 2001. Okay, that's an example. Or when someone's in a car accident, or when someone is experiencing some other type of acute stress that just happened to them. Chronic PTSD is different in that, say, an individual has been experiencing a low level of stress or a moderate level of stress their entire life. Okay, they after a while get used to that stress response. Remember when I told you about how the hypothalamus tells the pituitary to tell the kidneys to tell the adrenal glands to release a hormone? Okay, well, that hormone cortisol cannot go off every day at a high rate like that. At some point, the system has to shut it down to about a middle rate, or maybe even lower than that, to a lower rate, so that it can just sustain day to day. It's the cortisol is not meant to be going off every day in a person. But then you get individuals who are experiencing stress all the time. And when they're experiencing stress all the time, then they're going to have these cortisol levels even out over time, so that they are not always in high stress. Okay, you can't be in a panic attack every single day. You have to, at some point, have to figure out a way to deal with it and regulate it. Okay, those individuals sometimes experience chronic PTSD, or emotional distress. All right, and emotional distress is not a good situation. These are the people who are checked out. They're not always engaged with us and society. They sometimes go off to themselves and find it hard to reconnect. Okay, they become detached and they become traumatized, and they are in a situation where some people might think that they are psychotic. All right, they're having a nervous breakdown. All right, that is emotional distress. So you have some women walking around suppressing their emotions, but you have some who are walking around in pure distress and need help to get out of their situations. And they most certainly are dealing with negative health outcomes as well, I'm sure. And then you have depression. Depression doesn't look the same in African American women as it does in other people. There's generally certain signs that'll classify you as a depressed person. Things like sleeping all day, not taking care of yourself, not taking a bath for days and days on end. Now, a lot of people who have some sudden event happen to them, like a death of a loved one that they were very close with, can enter into a depression. that was brought on by that death, right? But then you have individuals who don't experience depression that way. You have people who say, I can't stop working, so I can't lay in the bed all day. Or they say, when I go to work, I can't just not take a bath and not brush my teeth and not take care of my hygiene, so I have to take care of myself. So these people are not classified as depressed, although they may still have all the other signs of depression, the chemical signs and the chemical changes in their brain. Now, if this happens and the person is still out and about in society, they may not be picked up on by other people who would otherwise say, hey, that person's depressed. We need to get some help for them. We need to do an intervention with them. We don't always do that. We say, hey, she looks like she's okay. She's going through a lot, but she's holding it up. She's keeping herself together. Look, she's coming to work. She's doing her hair. She's fixing herself up. She's okay. But the fact is that depression is undertreated and underdiagnosed in Black women, that we actually do need to figure out a way to address the fact that Black women are suffering from depression in many ways. So this is some of what would happen when, in terms of your brain responses to all the stress that's going on in your life. Now let's look at the behavioral responses, because that's one of the last pieces of the puzzle that we have to put together to explain how we are unique and different, and how we have to address these things in a unique way because of that. Behavioral differences. So when a Black woman is really stressed, she suppresses her emotions and she silences herself. So her brain's thought is just to suppress the emotion, don't even deal with it. But what her body does is it shuts up, it silences itself. So her mouth does not say what she needs or what's going on. In other words, Black women do not talk about their problems. They self-silence. Okay? And by self-silence, it means nobody's telling them to be quiet. That in fact, they have made a decision to be silent and not share their problems. Okay? And this can be detrimental because it is natural to seek social support and seek help when you have a problem. But somewhere along the lines, Black women lost the ability to feel comfortable doing that. So we have to think about that when we think about ways to get better. Okay, we have to think about the fact that it's our nature to actually be quiet and hold it in and be self-silent. Another response that you'll see by Black women is to binge eat, or emotionally eat. Now, what's happening when you are binge eating or when you're eating emotionally? What's happening is that you're not talking, but you're still doing something oral, right? And it helps, and that's just a psychology thing. It helps to do something oral because, and this is another anatomy thing, so forgive me for being an anatomy geek about this, but in the brain, there is a long nerve that's connected from the base of the brain where your emotions are and connects to your belly, to the back of the stomach. It attaches to the back of the stomach. So when you were designed as a human being, you were designed to have your emotions be connected to the way you eat and what you eat. Okay? You cannot see that nerve, and often in a gastric bypass surgery, before we got good and sophisticated at them, people would cut that nerve and it would create depression in people who had had gastric bypass surgery. You still see depression in people who have gastric bypass surgery, but we do know now to leave that nerve uncut and intact so that people don't suffer so much from being detached from their emotions. So, but at the end of the day, we were designed that way for a reason, because we do connect our emotions with eating. What do we do when we're happy? We eat. Well, we also do it when we're sad, okay? And emotions like sadness and happiness are very much connected to the way we eat, okay? So in African American women, they do not talk about it. However, they do eat. And binge eating is when you eat and you don't purge it, or you don't feel the need to, as you see with bulimics, binge on a food or binge on many different types of food and then cause themselves to throw up or take laxatives so that they can get all that food out of them. Okay. Instead, African American women keep or maintain the food. Okay. And don't throw it up. Okay. That being said, why would they do that? One reason would have to do with the fact that black women are okay with the way they look. Their body image tend to be very high, and their self-concept in terms of how they look tends to be very favorable. So black women aren't always interested in being thin for the sake of being thin. So it's not always necessary for them to rid themselves of those calories that they eat when they're binge eating. Often black women are not even aware that they're binge eating. They just look up and realize that an hour after they started a bag of chips, the entire big family size bag is gone. Okay, even Oprah Winfrey talks about that in the way she eats. And there have also been commercials on TV lately talking about binge eating disorder and the fact that many Americans are dealing with binge eating and need help to stop doing that. So you are not unique in the fact that you binge eat, but it is unique that African American women, instead of talking and asking for help with their problems, do binge eat as a response to many stressors. So it is worthy of note. And finally, I've talked about this one already, but having a sedentary lifestyle or a lifestyle with low physical activity or a lifestyle with inactivity or no physical activity. Now, when you do this, it could be that thing we talk about with depression where you just don't want to move. All you can muster up the energy to do is to go to work. And when you go to work, you can barely get through the day, and then you have to come back home, and then you cannot have anything else going on in your life in terms of activity. You can only bear and muster up enough energy to sit. So, that being said, a lot of African American women who may be depressed and overweight and are dealing with diabetes and other risk factors may be dealing with this whole system of issues right here. Okay. Or you could just be someone who wants to do more physical activity, is not depressed, and just has, finds it so that you don't have a lot of opportunities to do activities or you don't have a lot of time to do activities. All right. In either case, this study is here to help you with that. We're here to help you figure out ways to increase your physical activity so that you can address those things about your health that you want to. So, the last piece of the puzzle here, and I apologize in advance that this slide is going to look a little busy when we finish with it, but I just wanted to pull it all together for you in this last slide, and I promise we won't talk any more about anatomy and physiology in our brains. But I do want you to know how it's all connected, okay? So this model here gives you an idea of how all of these mental, psychological, social, and emotional issues can pull together on your physical health and make your physical health worse. This is what's going to help illustrate that. So, metabolic syndrome, you are a person who's at risk for it just because you're an African American woman, okay? Because 40% of African American women have metabolic syndrome. That's a very high number, okay? And if you're in this study, then you have at least one of the 5 signs of metabolic syndrome. So this is important for you to know, all right? So behavior, we talked about the behavior. We just finished up the last piece talking about how behaviors play into this. We started off that piece talking about the psychological and the social factors that play into this. So we understand those 2 pieces of this puzzle. Visceral obesity. Now, please apologize or forgive me for using that big term like that, but it just means belly fat. That's all that term means, belly fat. All right? And we talked about how belly fat plays into the whole puzzle here. How when you have fat around your organs and you have fat around your heart, that it actually causes those organs to malfunction and perform differently. Okay? And that we want to make sure that we're addressing that, because when you have belly fat, it leads to what we call in nursing and in medicine pro-inflammatory state. And what's that? In plain terms, a badly working immune system, a poorly working immune system, excuse me. So when your immune system is down, you're going to be in situations where you can develop infections or inflammation, okay? So inflammation is not a good state to be in. And when a person has a lot of belly fat, they are actually putting themselves at risk for being in a compromised immune state or in an inflammatory state. And what does that lead to? Insulin resistance. Now, you remember we talked about how the pancreas creates insulin and how the pancreas needs to be able to be functioning properly in order to put out the insulin that's needed to help us with digesting our food. Okay, so insulin resistance refers to what's happening in the pancreas and in the liver. All right. And insulin resistance is going to lead to what's happening on the bottom part of this chart here. Hyperglycemia. Hyperglycemia is another word for high blood sugar. Hyperglycemia is just high blood sugar. And we talked about before how blood sugar or sugar in the blood can be an irritant to the inner lining of the blood vessels, and about how sugar in the blood in excess is sending a signal to the body that something is wrong. Okay? So hyperglycemia is a problem. Also, hypertension. All right? All the problems above hypertension lead to hypertension. And we include in there stress and worry and all the things that go along with making your heart beat faster in the first place. Okay? So hypertension, same thing as high blood pressure. All right, see how it's all coming together? Now, dyslipidemia, I know that's a big word. Seems like we haven't talked about it, but see, lipid is in there. And lipids refers to cholesterol and triglycerides. Okay, and we talked about how they are the waxy, oil, fatty type substances that can sometimes be free floating in the blood when you eat it in excess. Okay, so when you eat cholesterol and triglycerides in excess and it's floating around in the blood, sometimes it can attach to the lining of the blood vessels and cause problems and blockages in the blood vessels. They can also sometimes become attached and get hard, but then through hypertension and the fast pumping of the blood through the vessels, then become kind of dislodged, or they begin to break away from the lining of the vessel and create what could lead to a stroke or to a heart attack. All right, so all of that leads to atherosclerosis, that big word that we talked about at the very beginning of our health lecture, and type 2 diabetes. Okay, and those are what lead to heart disease, and heart disease is the number one killer of all human beings. Heart disease is the number one cause of death in African American women. It also is highly preventable. You do not have to suffer from heart disease at a young age. You can prevent heart disease.